Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Energy Africa Café. We have a very special guest today. Her name is Dr. Rebekah Shirley. Dr. Rebekah, it's good to meet you.
Thanks for having me. Good to meet you as well.
Thank you. A bit about Dr. Rebekah Shirley. Dr. Rebekah Shirley is a Deputy Director for Africa at the World Resources Institute, where she works to create widespread public access to high-quality data and insights for mobilizing sustainable development solutions. Prior to joining WRI, Rebekah was the Chief of Research at Power for All, a global non-for-profit organization advancing universal energy access. Over her tenure, Dr. Rebekah has built a novel energy research dissemination engine that fills critical knowledge gaps for practitioners and decision makers on implementing integrated utility energy services, unlocking agricultural value addition, and creating livelihoods in the African context, receiving multiple awards for this work. Dr. Rebekah earned her PhD and MSc from the Energy and Research Group at the University of California, Berkeley, where, as a University Chancellor's Fellow, she designed innovative tools for power systems planning in emerging markets. She has over 15 years of experience leading energy and environmental research across Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. Hailing from the West Indies with roots in Jamaica and Trinidad, Dr. Rebekah now lives in Nairobi with her husband. Together, they enjoy exploring Kenya's great outdoors. Thank you once again, Dr. Rebekah, for joining. I'm sure you've had a great day. How's your day coming?
Well, it's been a good day. We are, of course, following closely the Africa Climate Summit and everything that's happening there. So just staying very close to that activity.
Interesting. That's interesting you're in the Africa Climate Summit because I'm reading some of the updates and I'm seeing there are incredible innovation and announcements being made to accelerate energy access, energy transition, environmental sustainability, and energy access. Thank you, Dr. Rebekah, for that. After your bachelor's degree, you spent 2 years working as an energy analyst before pursuing your MSc and then a PhD at UC Berkeley, where he designed innovative planning tools for emerging markets, strong emphasis on the accessibility of data and research. What motivated your decision to pursue a PhD in that specific field? And how did your academic journey impact your professional trajectory and core mission in making data and research accessible?
Wow, that's a great question. I love that because it takes me all the way back. And I'm originally from the Caribbean, and as the Marley brothers would call it, we're the cousins and distant relatives of our friends and family here in Africa. So I'm sure even those my early day stories will resonate with you guys and your audience. But for me, actually, it was the other way around. That my personal experiences were what was informing my academic choices and my career choices. I think growing up in the Caribbean, from a very early age, and probably the same here, you grow up with a very clear sense of how deeply connected we are to our environment around us. And as a student back in high school, I was president of our UNESCO club. And so we used to do lots of activities back then, beach cleanups, river cleanups. And what sticks out most in my mind, we used to go to this reforestation project, the Fonzamans Community Reforestation Project. Big up to everyone who's still there. It's this amazing women-led, award-winning NGO that focuses on the St. Anne's Hills and sort of reforesting and restoring these hills that are so subject to fire. And as kids, we used to visit and do tree planting and maintenance. And it just sort of reaffirmed for me this message that I was already getting through my non-academic channels, that we are so deeply connected to the earth and to nature, but also B, that something about that relationship is deeply off track. And even as children, you can pick that up. And so it was that personal experience that actually led me into environmental sciences. And I got placed in the energy portfolio at the EMA, as you mentioned, where I was working when I came back to Trinidad after my studies. And there again, it was personal experiences that led me the next step, because I got placed into the energy program. And in the energy program, the Caribbean, especially Trinidad and Tobago, where my mother is from and where I was at this point in time, is like, they call it like a mini Dubai, right? It's a very oil and gas heavy economy. And so we were doing everything from, oil and gas exploration to production to refining. And my job was to sort of do the environmental assessments that then get turned into environmental compliance for those kinds of projects. So I was learning so much about the very localized impacts to water quality, air quality, ecosystems of an oil and gas industry. And at that time, that was around, you guys would not maybe have been born or you would have been babies, but around that time, 2008, 2009, we were going through a massive global financial crisis. And so
Mm.
in the Caribbean, you had this dichotomy of two experiences. You had countries like Trinidad, countries like Venezuela, etc., who were actually really sailing through that time because oil prices obviously always go up when you have a crisis like that. And so things were not bad. But then the other half of my heart sits in Jamaica, where my father's family is from, and in islands that are sort of the importers of heavy fuel oils. It was the complete opposite, and these economies were so damaged by that crisis. And so I think it was for me seeing, family members, friends lose jobs, seeing our city, Kingston, become like a shell of what it used to be. I think that juxtaposition of this is what energy security can do for you
Yeah.
really drove me down the energy path. And so I have to confess that in those early days, it was not for me about emissions. It still is actually not really about emissions. It's about what you said at the beginning, equity and security and sustainability, and finding ways that we can have the agency to have to leverage the technologies that work for us. So my entry point was from this very personal experience. I said, well, I have to find energy solutions that work for Jamaica and that work for Barbados and that work for St. Lucia. And
Mm.
those happen to be renewable technology solutions. So that's what drove me down that path. And it was there that I realized, in school, I realized these are not island problems. Everybody in the world is dealing and grappling with the same things. And I realized that I had a very transferable skill sets on my hands.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Shirley, for that. I think I've picked a few, this is just the first questions, and I've picked a few lessons. First of all, the problem you're trying to solve, the solution is definitely around you. You just need to prepare for that. Another thing I learned from this is preparation meets opportunity. I know we always say that, but then you took me back to the days where you worked as when you were younger and you served with UNESCO amongst others, which also built you to this particular stage that you have gotten to. So basically, always need to prepare yourself, open yourself to opportunities and more of that. Then you also mentioned something about transferable skills. So no skill is useless, basically. I'm sure back then, if anybody told you that, oh, your days of service with UNESCO would amount to something really serious, but then you got out and you saw that, oh, the problem you're trying to solve then is not just particular to your environment, but it's a global problem. So no skill is wasted, basically. The more you learn, one way or the other is going to be applicable to the next thing. But then you made a comment about how serving community is very important. And while we are preparing for this podcast, we went through some of your interviews and we saw how you made a comment about how Africa's energy transition is more about people and livelihood. So I'm getting you're more of an altruistic person. So now, if you're building on that idea, right, how do you define prosperity in this context? So, and what does the future of work look like in Africa's evolving energy sector based on your professional experiences?
Yeah, I like that. And I like what you were just gleaning from the question before. And I would say, in addition to the fact that no skill set is limited, no context is limited either. You could be from the smallest
Mm.
place or the biggest place in the world, and you have something to share with the world is what I would really want people to take away. This is a fantastic question you've asked about sort of prosperity. What does prosperity mean, and what does the future of work look like for us? And I think, as you said, it's never for me, even working in the energy sector, been about, I think that the sector tends to lean towards a sort of techno-econism, if that's a phrase, if I can say, where we sort of lean into this demand supply technology versus cost of technology question, when to me energy security is about so much more than that. It's about so much more than the ability to consume. I think at a household level, agency to make decisions for you and your family and how to navigate your suite of options, and at the national level, again, the agency to pursue the priorities that you want for your country. That's what we're talking about. And so it's to me much more than just a sort of a consumption, solving for consumption problem. And I think that that leads me into what a vision for prosperity for this continent could look like. And my sense, what we're trying to do, for instance, at WRI, we have this philosophy that if we can help build robust, legitimate sectors of economy that are based on sustainability, from the renewable energy sector, but also to the circular agro-food sector, community-led forestry sector, the restoration economy sector, the green mobility sector. If we can build these sectors such to the point that they are robust enough that when you pull institutions like WRI out of the situation, they thrive on their own, we are actually helping to create thriving, shock-proof economies, and at the same time, waves of dignified, meaningful jobs for young and fast-growing populations, and at the same time, helping the world to decarbonize, and at the same time, revitalizing our landscapes and our ecosystems, which are the very armor of adaptation that's going to protect us in the future. And that vision is supported by the fact that Africa already has all of the perfect ingredients to build that kind of future. We have the vastest forest stocks, the most arable land, restorable land stocks, mineral stocks, clean energy supply stocks, the youngest, fastest growing population on earth, as I mentioned. All of that is here. It's really just about building the foundations, the plumbing, the infrastructure that will hoist our SMEs and our enterprises up, get them off the ground, get them to commercial readiness, and eventually churn out these entire local sustainable value chains that serve the continent and the world. To me, that is a vision of prosperity for the continent, because it's a vision that says Africa can be the first continent in the world to stake its progress, its very development thesis, its development agenda on not just the belief, but the truth that people, nature, and climate are deeply connected and actually work better together. To me, that's just such a powerful vision. We actually call it the Africa aspiration, because I feel like it's such a, it's not just about how can we survive the future. It's how can we thrive in the future and actually demonstrate a whole different way of doing life on earth. And who better to lead that way and to lead that path than Africa. So for me, my motivation personally in my work life and my personal life comes from that vision of what things could look like on this amazing continent.
Thank you so much for that. I like how you spoke about how it's not just enough for us to like survive, but we need to thrive, not just by just getting by, which gives an idea of it's not just about us getting by, it's about continual and improved growth across every stage that we get to as Africans. Still on subject of future of work, one of your key areas of research at
All
Power for
right.
All was quantifying the job opportunities created by energy access. Expectant to hear your answer on this question, because most of the time at the World Economic Forum, at COP, at the New York Climate Week, several other, even the UNJ, several other coming together, several other events and forums. And we keep talking about job creation, availability of job, using the right resources, etc. And there's also the conversation of how artificial intelligence might like thwart that progress, and which may cause like a regression. So I also want to hear your thoughts about that when you're answering this question, right? So from your experience, what do you see as the most important skill young Africans will need to thrive in this workforce? I got this from actually a mentor was telling me that like our generation, we were too book smart, but then we are not street smart. That is why we want to skill through everything, just do everything by the books. But then there's some loopholes that we are not looking into. There's some kind of knowledge or information that are contextual, right? And in as much as technology is aiding, they also believe that technology is not aiding. So the first question here for you is, what do you say is the most important skill young Africans will need to thrive in the energy sector? Then we can now go back to the academia part. But then let me hear from you first.
Well, it's a good question, and I didn't answer your question before, where you were asking sort of about what the future of work, especially in the energy sector, looks like. And I think for me, that future of work looks a little bit different than how it's right now cast in popular culture, because we tend to focus on solar, wind, geothermal companies, even the off-grid companies, the mini-grid companies, etc., and the tech jobs in those service providers or within those service providers. Those are definitely jobs of the future. I want to be clear. And I think that there's going to be a lot of growth and opportunity in that space. But the research, and you alluded to the research that we've done on this already. And actually, it's a biannual, every 2-year study. So we have about 6 years worth of information now on the renewable energy sector in Africa from bottom up studies. What the research is showing us is that as much as there's opportunity in the technician space, I hope I don't get canceled for saying this, but there's even more opportunity in the non-STEM fields. We tend to be so STEM focused, which is amazing, fantastic, love it. I'm a STEM kid myself, but by STEM I mean science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But even in the non-STEM spaces, there is so much opportunity. So what we're seeing, a lot of companies on the continent saying that they're looking for project management skills, people management skills, salespeople, NE people, distribution, logistics, compliance, law, standards, creatives who can do marketing, those kinds of things. So even within, I just want to say that even within the sort of the primary or direct jobs creation of service providers, there's a lot more opportunity than sort of tends to meet the eye. The second thing I want to say about what that future might look like is that the bigger opportunity, and again, this is the research that is showing us this, the bigger opportunity for jobs are not actually just in the companies that are doing the direct energy service provision. It's in the companies and enterprises that can exist due to the access to that clean energy, if you get me. So when we think
Okay.
about farming now, because farming is such a non-energy enabled exercise, and when we think about farming in the future, when we have access to clean energy both on farm and off farm, we're talking about two completely different ways of doing agriculture in Africa. And we're talking a lot more about renewable energy powered agribusinesses and value addition, not just planting and harvesting, but now we're talking about maize milling and cassava processing and fruit processing and oil processing. And so to your point about, being book smart, not street smart, I think oftentimes we hear, oh, young people are not interested in agriculture, young people are not interested in farming. But farming in the near future, not even in the distant future, in the near future, and being involved in the agricultural value chain in the near future will hopefully look something very different to what it looks like today. And there'll be far more opportunity. I think also if we look at transport, again, that's another one that's changing so rapidly. The number of bus companies, boda and bike companies, Second Life of battery companies, it's in these enabled spaces that we're going to see the massive gains on jobs in the future. And I think that's very, very exciting because it means, again, that it's not exclusive to those who got in and are in the energy sector in a very purist sense. It's really a space that's open to everyone. And to your question about, well, then, okay, so if that's what the future looks like, what are the skills that I need to think about harnessing or developing now? I would say a few things to that question. I would say one, it's not really about exclusive new skills that if you didn't learn them in time, sorry for you. I think that sort of I rebuke that that sense, that there is sort of this exclusivity around the skills that it's only for a few of us. No, it's really about there's some new green skills coming onto the radar, but more so it's about greening the more traditional skills, right? So just as a perfect example, in the solar space, which I know very well, there's actually a glut in Kenya right now of solar technicians. But you would think, oh, that's the thing to go and train in. When you speak to companies that work in solar, what they say is what they're missing are masons and welders and those more traditional spaces of skill. And so I think that one thing I would say is that don't necessarily be in a rush to move into new spaces. It's how do I think about adapting my traditional skill set or the skill set that I have with me right now to these new sectoral spaces. So take a training, take a course for yourself to get familiar with the sector, to learn about sustainability principles, and think about how those apply to your skill set or whatever interests you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shirley, for that. I think this is quite insightful. The Include Knowledge platform, in collaboration with the Kingdom of the Netherlands and some institutions in Nigeria, like the Royal Education Agency, the Board for Technical Education, and many others, they launched a TVET curriculum to ensure renewable energy development, basically. So it's not only something you go to school to learn, but then just like a vocational, just like a training. And they made mention to how like it's a lot. It's not about like solar installation or making connections. There's so many components to assembling a solar power plant, e.g. welding, e.g. So when you mentioned welding and connection, it just made so much sense that, oh yeah, people could actually, you don't need a fancy degree actually to make meaningful contribution to the future of renewable energy work. So thank you for that again. So the next question after that is going to be, how can academic institutions such as universities, training centers, even high school adapt their curriculum to bridge the gap between today's skills and tomorrow's energy jobs?
Great question. And thank you for that. I think this is an important topic because it's about how we deliver energy access, energy development, energy prosperity. And on the flip side of the same coin, it's about how we create jobs, opportunities, livelihood opportunities for the 10 million plus young people pouring onto the job market every year across the continent of Africa. And so I think to me, there is always sort of a two-sidedness to this question. And you're right about the studies. There are top-down studies like ILO, IRENA type studies that come out every year on the skills gap in renewable energy or the skills gap in clean energy. Those are they're good indicators, but because they're top-down, they're based on very high-level estimates. What is starting to come out now are some bottom-up censuses where we're having organizations like Power for All, where I was before, actually doing counts, literally going company by company, sampling across the sector in a given country or geography, and seeing what are the specific types of jobs being created, over what kind of time frame, over what kind of retention period, and with what level of skills requirement. And so we actually have a pretty good sense of, now that we've been collecting that type of data, I would say for maybe the past 5 years on this continent, we actually have a good sense of the kinds of skills that this sector, the renewable energy or clean energy sector, calls for. And I would say two things. One, obviously, there are direct jobs opportunities in the renewable energy space, working with solar companies, wind companies, geothermal companies, distributors for small and off-grid renewable energy appliances, work in the utilities, etc. So there's a lot of jobs creation opportunity in the direct workforce. But what's exciting to me, and what the research is very clear on, is that there are multiple times more jobs being created in the what we call induced space or the induced workforce, meaning once a community, a city, a town, a rural community gains access to electricity through whatever means, immediately it begins creating opportunity itself. And so those are the job opportunities that are very exciting to me. And we see a lot of that induced job opportunity happening in the agriculture space. So, if you think right now about agriculture, it's a very on-farm exercise, right? We don't do a lot of value addition in Africa. In other parts of the world, the US, Europe, for every ton of, or for every dollar of value generated on the field through a primary commodity, as much as $140 of value are created off farm by packaging, by grinding, by processing, and those kinds of things. We do very little of that. We do a lot of primary commodities agriculture on the continent, where we may be adding at most $10 to $20 of value per tonnage of product. Immediately energy becomes available in an agrarian community. Imagine all of the processing activity that can happen off farm. We're seeing examples in Uganda, here in Kenya, in Ethiopia, in West Africa, of communities gaining access to energy through mini grids or through grid expansion. And immediately you start to see maize milling, cassava processing, fruit drying, fish drying, oil processing, all of these kinds of things happening. And those are fantastic jobs creation opportunities. Similarly, in the electric mobility space, I think once you start to see, infrastructure for electric mobility being established in major towns, like look at Kigali, look here in Nairobi, the number of jobs that become created or possible, induced by the infrastructure that's being put in place, are so many. You now have so many bus companies, border drivers engaged in the electric mobility space, that all of the companies now doing second life of batteries. And so these enabled spaces, as we call them sometimes, spaces that become possible through the access to energy and productive energy at that's the exciting space for me on energy. And so when you ask what are the kinds of skills that young Africans would need to thrive in those types of spaces, I would say two things. Obviously, there's a lot of opportunity in STEM, in science, technology, education, engineering and mathematics, the sort of the STEM fields. There's a lot of opportunity there. There's a lot of opportunity in the non-STEM spaces as well. What we see, and again, there's research to back all of this up, what we're hearing from the companies that work across the value chain of renewable energy, from manufacturing through to developers, through to distributors, through to last mile companies, what you hear is what we need are people with project management skills, people management skills, sales skills, marketing skills, M&E, monitoring and evaluation skills, distribution skills, logistics skills, law and legal compliance and standards, leadership skills, creatives in marketing. And so there are both STEM and non-STEM opportunities in the sector, which makes it exciting. So then what it means is that the opportunity is not only for those who have trained in some special program and have some special renewable energy certification behind their name, right? I think there's so much opportunity, not just for new green skills, but for greening traditional skills. That's exciting to me because it means that the space is anybody's to take. It means that it's just about thinking how your traditional skill, in whether it's marketing, as I said, or sales or logistics or technical, can be thought of in a way that is applicable to this sector. And that may not always be obvious. I've met so many young people with the right types of skills who said, I never realized that the renewable energy was something I could work in. I never realized sustainability is something I could work in, but you have all the right skills for it. So I hope that's encouraging to people out there, that it's not that you need some particular type of degree or special training, but really thinking it's more the perspective that you take on. So the advice I would give is threefold. One, I would say, think about the opportunities, the entry points to sectors like sustainability, clean energy, climate, as I mentioned. It may not come in those kinds of terms. It may be agricultural productivity. And you say, oh, that doesn't sound like it's particularly green, but you don't realize actually it is, because the productivity is based on clean energy. So I would say to young people out there, look for those kind of entry points, and they may not scream climate, they may not scream green, but they are. The second thing I would say is, there's so many open access training opportunities, online courses, free curricula that are out there that you can take to just sensitize your own self to the language of climate, sustainability, energy access, energy for development, so that you can speak that language and start to see yourself in that sector. There's so many of these online. I've myself have participated and offered content for so many of them. The AFD has one, the Florence School of Regulation has one, and these are all open access trainings that anybody in the world can take. And the third thing I would say is, think about your soft skills. Employers are willing to teach somebody the technical skills if they come with the soft skills, because the soft skills, ironically, are actually the harder things to find. And when you see them in a candidate, you'll grab them. And so I would say to young people, it's not just about the certification, it's your leadership qualities, your people skills, your management skills, your interpersonal skills, your social skills, your critical thinking skills. Hone those and demonstrate them, and be able to sort of document your capacity to leverage those soft skills in the workplace. That's, to me personally, the most important thing, because The technical skills then are actually easy to learn. And in fact, a number of companies who have very bespoke and proprietary technology would actually rather to train you in their technology themselves. So I hope that's a helpful answer. And I hope that a lot of people can see, there's space for me, even here, because there absolutely is.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Shirley, for that. I like how you went in depth into how we can actually modify what we have to amplify the jobs of the future. And you made an important comment of not forgetting people or ignoring people that do not have papers yet. So I'm thinking those people who do not have formal education, we can also find a purpose for them to fit into the energy future. Thank you so much for that. So now we're going to be talking more on your role as deputy directors. As deputy director of WRI Africa, you are at the forefront of shaping evidence-based solution. So open source energy modeling and data tools are becoming an exciting part of the conversation going forward, right? So could you share your perspective on how open data and open source tools can help Africa overcome barriers in energy access? And also, you can also talk about how government, the private sector, and researchers can work together to ensure that the open source solutions are positioned not just as tools, but then as catalysts for systemic change in Africa's energy transition.
Well, I think that's a great question, and I'm biased because as a researcher myself and leading a research organization that's sort of our bread and butter is open access data platforms, my personal opinion is that open access data is critical to our solution set in Africa and globally. In fact, what we like to talk about at WRI, or what I like to talk about, is data as solution science, because I think there are a lot of data platforms that exist today that help us understand the problems, right? That help us understand emissions, that help us understand energy access, that help us understand pollution. And good for us to gaze at the problems, even better for us to be able to create solutions, right? And so I'm really interested in where data platforms are in support of solution science. And in the 5 years that I have been leading this organization, platforms have evolved at such a rapid pace. Not just our own at WRI. We have so many partners in the space that deliver data platforms, not just for energy, but for food, land, water, cities, air quality, etc. And these platforms are really evolving at such a rapid pace, especially the last 2 to 3 years, how AI has entered the scene and helped us from a sort of an algorithmic and language learning perspective to really fine tune what the platforms can do. Just to give a couple of examples, at WRI we have a platform called GLAD Alerts, which leverages satellite imagery from NASA on a weekly basis, and is then layered onto our global forest watch, global tree cover loss data, and helps us understand where tree disturbances are happening across any geography across the world. So you can actually identify individual tree disturbances. Why would something like that be important? Well, when you're responsible for monitoring a forest reserve or a national park or a community forest, a community forest association area, you're oftentimes responsible for patrolling tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of hectares, right? And so how do you do that as a community group without tools and without data? And so now that we have this type of science coming to the fore, it makes monitoring the health and the integrity of forests that much more manageable of an exercise, because you can actually pinpoint now where has there been a disturbance. Take yourself directly there. Verify, was this a fire? Was this a tree felling? Was this legal? Was this illegal? And take action and enforce. And so we've seen tools just like GLAD Alerts have a demonstrable impact on reducing forest cover loss in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the larger Congo Basin region. Actual percentage points are being taken off every year from forest cover loss, which is critical to our climate fight, right? And an example I love to give is that same tool that I'm talking about, Glad Alerts, was used in Madagascar. You have community groups that are sort of working hand in hand with the National Park Service to patrol national parks, because the communities have a vested interest in these parks being healthy and well preserved because of what they gain from the parks, in terms of resources and in terms of employment. And so they're doing these transect walks every week, leveraging this tool on their mobile phones, doing the monitoring and the verification of where disturbances are happening. Long story short, this type of data was able to help Madagascar and the Madagascar National Park Service make the case for UNESCO World Heritage credentials for key parks in Madagascar, and they were successful in that bid. And I think last year, if not year before, 5 national parks in Madagascar received designation across the Andrian Dry Forest region as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I love to give that example because it's citizen science backed by data platforms that are leveraging, as I mentioned, NASA level data, but in the hands of individuals. How powerful is that kind of data? We do a lot on air quality. Again, this is another story I love to tell. Is we've worked with a couple of key partners like Airco and again NASA to set up monitors across cities like Nairobi. We oftentimes have very top-down data on what air quality issues are and what air quality looks like at the city level. In Africa, we usually are working on very high level projections and estimations. Now with actual monitored data at the level of a city like Nairobi, we have a much different landscape and view on what air pollution looks like for the city. And we now upload that data on a regular basis to a platform called Canary Alerts. And what that platform has been able to alert us to is what you think might be the biggest pollutants in your city may not actually be. And what you're not wary of may actually be some of your major pollutants. In a county like Nairobi, for instance, what this data has shown us is that obviously some of the traditional sectors like mobility, transportation are major contributors to air pollution and particulate matter in the atmosphere. Thinking about the vehicle fleets that we have here in Nairobi, that's no surprise to anyone. But what may be a surprise to some is that actually healthcare facilities, hospitals, and the burning of hospital waste is a major contributor to polluted air in Nairobi. Gross, right? And so that allows that information, which did not exist 2 years ago, helps us to now say, let's create an action plan on air quality for Nairobi. Nairobi just released a few weeks ago its Nairobi Air Quality Action Plan, the first time ever, and now has a budget line itemed on air quality and will actually start to address some of these key areas of air pollution that, again, a few years ago, we hadn't been able to identify because we didn't have the open access data. Those are just 2 examples. We obviously have the Energy Access Explorer, another fantastic platform that helps us build energy access plans at the county level. Again, completely open source, completely open access. But I think the case that I'm making is that these types of data tools, especially open source tools that can be leveraged by anybody, anywhere in the world, to me are really central to solutions and to catalysts for systemic change across the continent. I've seen it with my own eyes, and it's happening in real time, right in front of us.
Yeah. Like I'm getting to learn more as you're speaking, and I'm sure the listeners too will be surprised. I think we undermine the power of data in Africa. We undermine the power of data. I was listening to one of Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's speech, and she was saying that, like, basically, I'm going to paraphrase, but her point was one of the ultimate drivers for social change is data. And that is why we need to keep revisiting history to see where we got it right so we can replicate that going forward. I'm sure she was talking about social change, but I think it's also applicable in the power sector. We need to get as much information as possible and to as the question says, to catalyze growth and development. So we're going to be talking about, next question is going to be on Africa's energy transition. We often talk about the promise of Africa's energy transition, but we know the path is not without constraints, from financing and governance to infrastructure and technology adoption. From your years of research and policy engagement, what do you see as the biggest constraints holding back Africa's energy transition today? And what practical steps do you believe could help overcome them?
That's a good question. I think the number one challenge is obviously political will. And we talked about, that idea of what is prosperity, energy prosperity, what does the future look like? And we talked about the idea that it's about the access to the resource space, the economic space, and the socio-political space for agency to be a decision maker, right? And to have the tools at your disposal to be part of decision making. And so I think for me, challenge number one is political will. I think if the vision for energy transition, for nature-based solutions, for systemic change, and sort of economic sector transition that puts people, nature, and climate at its core, if that vision is high enough level on the political agenda, everything else flows from there. Finance flows from there, policy flows from there, incentive design flows from there, engagement of private sector stakeholders flows from there. So to me, political will and political priority of these types of agenda that we're talking about is numero uno. It's number one. And the good thing is I'm seeing a number of countries now moving in that direction. We just came out of the Africa Climate Summit, where we're seeing more and more leadership and commitment from countries across the continent. We've now seen the national energy compacts / commitments to energy access. So I think that's positive. And what's also even more positive to me is that in a number of countries, the responsibility on political leadership is shifting from the national to the subnational level. That's exciting to me because it brings the decision making closer to people. So if you take Kenya, for instance, where counties, the 47 counties in Kenya, are now responsible, mandated, in fact, to deliver county level energy plans and policies that then aggregate up to the national level. That means that people on the ground are actually directly able to engage on what my county's energy plan or your county's energy plan looks like. And so we're seeing a number of counties stepping up to the table and taking that challenge to heart. A county that I love to talk about is Makueni County here in Kenya, that just very recently launched its Makueni County Energy Plan. It now also has a Makueni County energy policy that is aligned with that plan. And out of that policy and that plan, they're actually now able to build out an investment prospectus and identify the specific project opportunities that exist in the boundaries of that county and say, hey, investors, local investors, domestic investors, international investors, come to this county because we have clear policy. We have an enabling environment for you, and we know exactly which projects are aligned with our plan. When I see that kind of thing happening, we're well on our way to a prosperous energy transition. So for me, number one is political priority. And I think what's very inspiring and still keeps me very motivated is seeing that level of political responsibility come down to the subnational level. One other thing I would say is a big challenge, obviously, and you hinted to it, is finance and finance partnerships. So where are our local financial institutions? Are our domestic finances able now to lean in more heavily on the opportunities that exist, both at the utility level, sort of at that sort of very high level, building out large scale renewable energy power plants, looking at transmission, looking at power pool trading between countries within a region. There's so much opportunity now in terms of energy infrastructure, and a lot of our domestic banks and domestic financiers are making a push towards infrastructural investments because they're generally safe investments. And so I think we're seeing more, and I would love to see even more engagement of our domestic financiers on energy infrastructure. And also, I think there's a lot of opportunity even in the smaller scale renewable energy space and the productive uses of energy in agriculture, in mobility, in the health space, and all of those areas that we talked about before. So I think those are the two big challenge areas I see. But to me, though they're challenge areas, to me, I see so much movement that I'm actually very excited about what the future of Africa's energy transition is going to look like. I'm seeing a lot of work being done to overcome those barriers and create change.
Wow, Dr. Shirley, thank you. Thank you so much. I get why you love this question again. The next question is going to be about how you've built your career. You have built your career that combines academia, research, and leadership in global organization, and you also mentor young professionals and students at the Carnegie Mellon University Africa. Looking back on your own journey, what lessons do you want most? What lessons do you want to pass on the most to the next generation of African energy leaders, especially those just starting their path in this field, including myself?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I spend a lot of time talking with young people because I wish that when I was at that stage in life, someone was taking the time to talk to me and help me figure out a path. So I spend a lot of time doing that, and I think there are a couple of anxieties that I hear over and over again from young folks across the continent, and also young folks across the Caribbean, across the entire diaspora that I engage with. One of those is a topic that we talked about before of how to get in to the space and how do they sort of position themselves. And another anxiety I hear is sort of, about the space that how they build a career for themselves. And in response to those anxieties, I would say a few things. One, that remind yourself nobody paints your story for you but you. So if you studied engineering, if you studied law, if you studied marketing, if you studied art, the world is your oyster, and any starting point is a good starting point for doing something in this world that contributes to people, nature, and climate. Don't let anyone box you in or box you out. Anywhere you've started from, there is space for you, right? And so my number one is just like, you find your passion, and trust that no matter what you're passionate about, there is a way to connect that into sustainability, because ultimately sustainability is about agency, and it's about people across the world being able to say and make decisions on what their environment is going to look like. The second thing I would say is that if you're a young person listening to this podcast from Africa, remember that you are the future, actually. We know, and the projections from the UN are clear, that by the middle of this century, 2050, 1 in every 4 persons on the face of this earth is going to be born in Africa or of African descent. 1 in every 4. 1, 2, 3, bam. 1, 2, 3, bam. Right? So 1 in every 4 is going to be African. And 2/3 of those African young people are going to be living in cities, close to connected to each other, in close proximity to each other, where they can brainstorm amazing ideas together. So let no one tell you otherwise. If you are a young person sitting on this continent today, you are the future of the world, not just of Africa. And so whatever ideas you are having and co-conspiring with your friends, with your colleagues, those are the ideas that really matter. And I encourage young people to be bold, to have bold ideas, and to know that their ideas matter on a global scale. Whether your issue is solving pollution, or whether your issue is creating space for the arts, do it because it matters on a global scale, literally by the geography of where you are. And the third thing I would say is that it's not what I have found in my personal experience working in the sector now for more than 15 years. Is that it's not about trying to be a unicorn. I see a lot of young people trying to figure out how do I distinguish myself, set myself apart, do the one thing that nobody else in the world is doing. Great if you have those types of ambitions, but solution science is not about unicorns. It's about collective action. It's about everyone doing their small thing and those small things adding up to real monumental socio-political change that truly drives the needle or moves the needle. And so I would say, as I said, no matter where you're starting from, no matter what your skill sets are, no matter how loud or quiet you are as a person, and how big or small your ideas are, this space is for you. It is for everyone because we're talking about a non-exclusive, agency-oriented world that works for everyone, that works for people, that works for nature, and that works for climate. So I'll pause there, but I just think, if you're a young person today, this is your time. Get involved in some way. Do your little thing, and you won't regret it, I'm sure.
Wow, this is it's a lot to take in, and I'm very happy to have hosted this session because I've learned a lot. I feel special because I've heard it before the rest of everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Shirley. So now to the fun question. We've heard a lot about work. We want to know what gets you going. So enough about like the power sector and your work, but still a bit about the power sector and your work. But then I would want to know the fun thing about you, and I'm sure every other person is also curious. My question to you is, if you were the film director about the energy industry in Africa, what would be your signature movie title? And what advice will your story tell to enable others in the sector to rise to the occasion?
My gosh. Okay, that's a hard one. My signature film title would have to be, I call a film about the renewable energy sector. I feel like I should have an answer on this. Maybe something like Beyond the Green, because I think we tend to focus the conversation on energy around emissions, which please don't cut out this part, I think is completely important. But I really feel that it's beyond emissions for us in Africa. We're 4% of global emissions. So for us, it's so much more about the topics that you raised at the very beginning of equity and security and so on. So maybe I would call it something like that, Beyond the Green. And then it could almost turn like kind of sci-fi and could have some really cool. Yeah, I like this. I'm going to start thinking about this.
Okay. You see, so now you could add it to your LinkedIn now that you're also a movie director.
Yeah. Let me look into that. It could be the next pivot.
Actually, jokes aside, we could actually do like a short movie on this. I'm just going to close up the podcast and repeat some of the key takeaways. So I think for me, the major takeaway is the thing about skills when it comes to young people. For our listeners, I would like you to know that whatever it is you're learning now, it's not far-fetched from the problems we're trying to solve. And you don't need to get, as Dr. Rebecca said, you don't need to get something new or something fancy to make meaningful contribution. Drawing back to Dr. Rebecca's experience. So when she left her hometown, she saw that it was not just but the problems she was trying to solve then wasn't just particular to the islands, but like everyone in the world was actually facing similar issue. So the problem you're trying to solve is around you. You don't have to go very far. Thank you so much for listening. You can subscribe and follow us on all our social media platforms. I remain your host, Fasayo Omofe. Thank you. See you the next episode.